Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I would say it's temperamental. You know, people differ tremendously in their temperaments, and to think that there's a warrior temperament is a perfectly reasonable thing to think. I mean, there's been whole cultures, many cultures, who are devoted to fostering that warrior mentality, you know, where if you weren't like that, you were the outlier. I would say that's probably true of most human cultures across most of time. You know, we've been fortunate enough to live in relatively peaceful times, at least the vast majority of us, so the necessity for that, like right at the edges of actual warfare, is much less than it might be under other historical circumstances. But it's a deep part of many people's nature. And so the question is, what do you do with that, right? And I mean, one alternative potentially is criminal behavior. And you know, the fact that so many people like watching movies about bad guys, you know, is an indication of how attractive that is to people. And I think the reason for that is that, well, Nietzsche observed at one point that most of what people regard as morality is just cowardice. And what he meant by that was that people don't do bad things not because they're good, but because they're afraid to do the bad things. And then when they see people do the bad things, they're actually really deeply attracted by that, because it speaks to part of them that could go beyond the rules. And that's actually a necessary part. It's a really necessary part. Like, you don't make men safe by making them weak. In fact, they're much more dangerous when they're weak, because they'll stab you in the back when they get the chance, or take advantage of you when they get the chance. You make men safe, let's say, by making them strong, and then by making sure that they're disciplined. And so, you know, you've got people like you have got this, let's say, warrior mentality that's a deep part of their temperament, and then you have some choices about what you might do with that. You might try to discipline it and bring it under voluntary control and integrate it into your character, in which then it can make you someone who's stalwart and indomitable, and who will move forward, you know, in the face of tremendous risk. And well, that's the optimal pathway if you have that kind of temperament. I think, like, it's the men that have the most, what would you call it? It's not aggressive exactly, but we'll leave it at that. Aggressive and fearless temperaments that can be the best men. But it's like having a very powerful dog. You better discipline it, because otherwise it's going to be a monster.
Well, I was a rebellious kid, right? And I could have easily gone down the path of crime. And as a matter of fact, many of my friends that I, you know, left when they stayed at home, they did end up as criminals and having big trouble with the law, or going down even paths of drugs and everything else that you can get into. But when we were kids or younger, everyone kind of had the same thing. But like you said, I'm so lucky, because I just signed that piece of paper, and I saw that I could do something, and I could take all that aggression and all that energy, and I could do something that was good and positive. And we joke about that in the SEAL teams, that many guys, you actually, to be a good SEAL, you sort of have this criminal mindset that you've somehow harnessed and you keep under control most of the time.
Yeah.
And occasionally it does get out of hand, and we got guys that get in trouble, and that happens. And if we only took guys that would never get in trouble, we wouldn't have anyone in the ranks, really.
Yeah. Well, you also see too in the classic hero stories. I mean, you see this with Harry Potter, for example, which I'm making reference to because it was such a phenomena. I mean, when something makes welfare mother richer than the Queen of England, you shouldn't take note, right? And when kids are reading 500-page books and standing in line waiting for the next one, and when you produce a whole movie empire around something, you should take note of that. Well, Harry Potter's little team aren't the delinquents, right, who have no discipline, but they're also not the good kids. They're the kids who will break rules when necessary, and that's the issue. Break rules when necessary. Now, the question is, when is that necessary? Well, that's sort of the ultimate ethical choice. But, you know, why did that work for you, do you think? You know, like, why was it? Well, two questions. One would be, why did you decide to step into a disciplined structure I mean, that's obviously very difficult. And why do you think you did that and some of the other kids that you knew that were like you didn't?
It was really one of the most rebellious things that I could do was to join the military. So I come from a small New England town. People get done with high school, they go to college, they get a job as whatever people get jobs as. They follow that very normal path. And I didn't even know anyone that joined the military. And so that was the most rebellious thing I could do. Oh, college? No. Education? No. I'm going to go be a commando. That's what I'm going to do. And it was the most rebellious thing I could do. I think that's one of the reasons why I did it. It was also a complete breakaway from, family. Oh, okay, I will have no reliance on you. I'm going. You don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm done. I will not rely on anyone else. I will be self-reliant. I hadn't really set myself up properly. And now all of a sudden, all I had to do, that was all gone. It didn't matter. The past did not matter at all. I had a completely blank slate. If you do this stuff properly, you'll do well and you'll ascend that hierarchy.
That's a very interesting thing, because then it's not merely a matter of following a set of arbitrary rules. It's following a set of rules that have a clear path to success. Right, that's a very different thing, and that's also something that's honest, because the rules of the game are well established, and then if you play it properly, you get to win, and that's a big deal as well. And you mentioned the SEAL types, and I've met a number of people like that. They're capable of breaking rules, let's say, or maybe even inclined to break them. But I also think that, and this is part of the reason that I'm an admirer of Carl. See, he was very interested in the barriers to enlightenment, because if there's such a thing as being enlightened, let's say, then why isn't everyone enlightened? If it's just a matter of taking the glorious route and following your bliss, let's say, it's like, well, that sounds pretty easy. Why isn't everyone enlightened? But Jung's thinking isn't like that at all. He believed that in order to transform your personality, that first of all, you had to be disciplined, that's for sure. But you also had to integrate that part of you that was terrible and capable of breaking rules and make it part of you. And so then, and I really like that idea.